Hi everyone, I'm Kaitie Chambers, an advocate here at Figma, and I'm delighted to be joined by Nicole today.
Hi, my name is Nicole McLaughlin, and I am a designer focused on upcycling.
So Nicole, we heard a lot of great content on your keynote this morning. Would love to dig more into what we're looking at here on the table. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so today I brought my water bottle holder that I made out of upcycled Figma materials. So I took a tote bag and a Figma water bottle, and we created this very utilitarian option for you to carry your bottle around with you.
So important. I'd love to learn more about the inspiration behind this particular idea. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm very outdoorsy. I live in Colorado and I love to hike, and I'm always kind of finding outdoor activities, and it's just nice to be able to have your water bottle around with you. Absolutely. But also if you're in the city or going between meetings and stuff, so it's a really nice thing to keep stashed on you. And then there's also a pocket here so you can put your pens or pencils, and then you have a bungee so it keeps your water bottle nice in place, and then a nice strap so you can carry it around.
Fantastic. I would love to have one of those on my next hike, I can tell you that. And we'd love to dig a little bit more into the process you use for creation. So thinking about making something like this, can you walk us through that process? Like, where do you start when you're creating it?
Yeah, so for me, I always go towards materials that I maybe have a lot of. So I'm thinking about, tote bags and water bottles or something that I know I have a lot of. I think we all do. And so this was an opportunity to be able to use up that, material that you maybe haven't used in a while. Yeah. And so for me, I took a tote bag that had this really cool graphic on it, and I wanted to make sure that that was sort of like the focal point to really highlight the cute butterfly graphic. Of course. And so for me, it was just laying out the tote bag. So step one really was to take the tote bag out, and here it is. I have my chalk already marked on it, but
I see.
I basically wanted to figure out the measurements of the bottle and then the measurements of the tote bag to be able to, figure out how can I create that pattern that will include the graphic, and everything will sort of come together from there.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I started. I think, really for me, when I start a project, I look for the materials and like anything that I can take from it that already exists. So I knew there's already straps on it. Right. So I wouldn't have to add that. I can take them off and then, put them back on later.
Yes.
And that saves you from having to buy like a webbing material or something else. And then the canvas material is a really nice, like thick material, so it's pretty sturdy and will create really good shape.
Fantastic. Yeah, this morning you talked a lot about making patterns that try to use the most of the material that you have, and it looks like you're doing that here with this tote bag. You're really leveraging all the parts of the design.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really like how I approach something, is like trying to figure out what can I make, that wouldn't create as much waste. And so for me, it's like creating a really simple pattern. So for this, it's a rectangle. It's 14 inches wide by 10 inches high. And honestly, from there, you can kind of build it to customize your bottle and the size of your bottle. And then, but all the excess, which is, here, and then on the side and on the top, we can actually use that to be able to create that pocket. So we'll get there.
Fantastic.
But yeah, that's really the first step. And from there, so you measure out your pattern, and then you'll start to cut it down.
Yes.
And at that point too, you can also decide how thick you want it to be. So you can decide if you want to leave it just a single layer, or if you want to make it really sturdy and do a double layer. If you have a home machine, I recommend the single layer because it can get kind of thick.
I was gonna say, I don't know if my sewing machine can handle that.
The single layer though of the canvas, I think it will be good.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Yeah, and also think about how heavy your water bottle is. How much water are you gonna need?
Yeah, how much water are we drinking? Like, we gotta make sure that it's sturdy.
Right, I also wanna talk about here this chalk line. So it looks like, I always hear the, measure twice, cut once, or that saying.
Yeah.
So it sounds like when you're measuring it, you're kind of drawing out exactly what to cut, so you'll be set when you go to cut.
Yes, exactly. And like the measurements that I had include the seam allowance as well, so that's key to note. And we're gonna be clean finishing the edges on this project, so making sure that seam allowance will include those nice folds that you'll have. So once you cut this down, we're gonna have a nice fold and press on there, so there's no frayed edges or anything, like that showing.
Fantastic. All these pro tips are so important.
Yes, of course. I mean, and this is such a great first project, to be honest. Like, it's very simple, and like I said, like you can really add more to it or go crazy with it if you want.
Yeah, why not? So then where do we go from there? What's next?
So once this is all cut, then we're gonna move on to our next part, which is to pin or clip it. And so like I said, so we cut off the edges, and so we want them to be nice and clean. So we actually folded them over.
Okay.
And that's with our seam allowance there, a nice fold. I pressed it with an iron.
Okay.
Just to keep it, you know, from kind of like coming undone. It just really keeps it in place.
Yeah.
And then I use fabric clips. I find it to be a little bit easier than pins in this situation. But this really gives you kind of the visual of like the size. Okay. So it gets a lot smaller.
Yeah.
So just note that.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna ask about these clips. They are fantastic. I always use pins and I end up poking myself.
Yes. I feel like fabric clips are kind of underrated.
Yeah.
I have found them to be really helpful, especially like when you're sewing and like you have to unclip like or unpin as you go. Like, you know, sometimes it can get a little bit too much and there's too many pins everywhere.
Unwieldy, they end up on the floor.
Exactly. So I think the clips are good. To be honest, I think they last a little bit longer sometimes than the pins because the pins will bend.
Of course.
So,
yeah.
you can find them at pretty much any fabric store.
Another pro tip.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay.
And then, so something to note at this step though is that we have not really, I just kind of lightly pinned the top here, just with like a single fold. But this is actually going to be how we create our tunnel at the top. So this is going to be folded over once again. Okay. We'll get to that, but that's that's going to be one of the more challenging parts of the project. Okay. Because you're gonna have to feed through your cording.
Of course.
And then also at this step, like I said, we're gonna have some excess materials that we cut off. And so this is your opportunity to be able to add a little pocket. Of course. And you can go crazy with the pocket if you want. If you want the whole thing to be a pocket, I put a small little pencil pocket here, and I just clipped it right up against the side. And the reason I did that is so when we stitch it closed, this will just, you know, finish it off right there, and you won't have to worry about it. So
is it already a pocket here?
So I just am clipping. Sorry,
back,
I'm gonna clip it back on so I can show you. And yeah, I just folded it over, and I did the same thing where I just kind of folded over the edges, and then, you know, at that point you could stitch it down. Fantastic. And you, like I said, you can make this if you want it to be the whole size of the project, you can. Right. And so yeah, then you would put that on. The only thing I would note is to make sure you leave yourself some space from the top. I think about 3 inches from like the edge of the project. Right. Because when you do sew that tunnel, you don't want to stitch your pocket closed.
That would defeat the purpose.
Yes. And you can also, like, if you want, you can stitch down the edges and then add the pocket, but I find this is probably the best part to add the pocket.
But it does look like you're adding the seam on the pocket before you sew it down.
Yeah, exactly. I just tacked the top down. Yeah. But then once you stitch it down, then you can, you know, you can fold your edges and stitch it directly to it.
Fantastic. And so it looks like you made this pocket the size of a pen. Is that right?
I did. I did like a double. You can do like a pen and a pencil or a marker.
Love that.
And yeah, and so it's honestly, I love a pocket.
I love a pocket.
Storage.
I wish every dress had pockets.
Everything had pockets. That's my goal in life, is to add pockets to everything.
Fantastic. So. Great. And so then what's the next step from there? We have everything ready?
Okay, so everything's ready to be sewn. Yep. And then the next step is to sew it. And so we have sewed down now our sides and our tunnel here. And so by doing that, you want to make sure that you'll fold it over, you'll stitch that bottom part, but this is going to remain open here. Yeah. And that's like the tunnel or the channel that you will feed through your cord, so you create a cinch. That's how you'll create the cinch. But yeah, this is kind of like the base of the project here. And so the next step, you're going to fold it over, and then you're going to stitch up the side of that. So from this project, because I clean finished this side, and I did, like I said, this pocket here is not clean finished. Right. If you just fold it over and then stitch up that side, then it'll be nice and cleaned and finished. Brilliant. And next part, this little guy here, so that strap that we took off earlier, this is going to, I just cut off like a small piece here. Okay. And this part is going to be attached on the bottom.
I was wondering what's on the bottom.
Yes, so the reason we do that is to keep the bottle in. Of course. And we want to make sure that it stays in place. I like to do like a pretty good stitch on there, like a nice, like really lock it in there, that stitch, or a box stitch, just to make sure when your bottle, in case it is really full and heavy, that it really holds it in. Okay. And so it's kind of nice that you can just add this in. You can do 2 and do a cross, or 1. So. Yeah. And so once you stitch that up, you'll put that guy in, and
Yeah, I was gonna ask what the strongest stitch is. So when you need something like that, that really has to hold, what kind of stitch
I
are you
would just
using?
honestly, on like any machine,
Yeah.
just make sure you go like back and forth a couple times and
Yeah.
just really make sure that like it's in there.
Okay, fantastic. Okay,
Cool.
so we have that part sewed. Where do we go from there?
So now that's stitched on.
Okay.
And the next part would be to add in the straps. And then at this point, you'll add in your cord.
Okay.
So I measured out, I just had a paracord, but you can also do like a bungee.
Yeah.
Even a shoelace if you
Ooh.
don't have access to that.
Why not?
But I think a paracord is always great.
Yeah.
I usually will I'll cut it and I'll burn off the edge because sometimes it could fray a little bit.
Yeah.
Something to note when you do stitch it up to the side, you want to leave that tunnel open.
Okay.
And so the reason is so that the cord can come back out of it.
Right.
So when you stitch it up, just as you go up to the top, just stop right as you get to that tunnel there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, so then we would add in our cord and then also at this point too, so this was the straps that came off the tote bag, but I just connected them here at the top with a nice box stitch.
Okay.
And then kind of just measure it out.
Yeah.
And then from there, you'll stitch it directly onto the bag. I like to stitch it on the outside.
Okay.
Just so when you cinch it, it doesn't get all wonky.
Right. Yeah.
And so you'll stitch it on the outside. I usually like to try to go right where that tunnel stitch is.
Okay.
But try not to stitch on top of your cord or else it's gonna be a little bit challenging to cinch it. So then you'll stitch
So we sew on our straps. And then are there any tips for feeding the cord through?
There is a tip for feeding the
I
cord
knew there had to be.
That might be the trickiest part of this whole project.
Yep.
Is getting it through, especially if you have that double layer or even just sometimes canvas, it can be a little finicky.
Yeah.
So I like to put a safety pin on the edge of my cord, like at the tip of it.
Yeah.
And then it kind of helps you to feed it through so you can feel it and kind of like pull it through.
Yes.
Be patient. It can take a little bit of time to get it through.
Okay, so you're not doing anything wrong if it's just taking you a while. Okay.
There's other, like I've done things like crazy to get through waistbands. I've taped cord to chopsticks and fed it through that way. Sometimes you have to get kind of creative to make it work, but honestly, it's a really good feeling when it comes out the other end and you're like, I did it, I've made it.
So worth it.
Yes, and then from there, you'll add your strap, and then that'll leave you with your final product.
Incredible.
So your cord will be in. You can add in a cord lock here. You know, honestly, I take them off of old jackets.
Oh, smart.
You'd be surprised like how many of these you might actually have around. And then I'll tie off the edge with a knot and I'll burn those edges, like I said, so you don't fray it, you know?
Okay.
And then,
you say you find these in places. How do you get that on there? Is it hard to get that part on there?
No,
or you just feed the cord through.
Just feed the cord through, and then it might take a little bit of wiggling to get it on there.
Yeah.
And you can find them at any craft store as well if you don't have any. Like I'll take them off of an old jacket, or I find them in thrift stores a lot. So anytime I keep an eye out for cord locks,
of course,
they're good to have.
Well, and I love how you matched it with the color of the design, and also the color of the cord with the pattern.
Yes, exactly.
All the details.
Gotta consider it. I mean, you can pick any color, go crazy and match it to your graphic or have fun with it. But yeah, and then, there you have your pocket and you have your strap. And
incredible.
Then you're good to go.
Good to go. Start carrying your water around.
Yes,
Staying hydrated. Always stay hydrated. Love that. So good.
Thank you.